This One's Wife. Kristin Scott Thomas. No thanks, Meghan. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Many of you will be familiar with Dame Kristin Scott Thomas, who is a class act and poles apart from the base individual that is this one's wife. Just in case you're not fully familiar with who she is an actress. She was best known for appearing in Four Weddings and a Funeral, and also The English Patient. She's critically acclaimed in relation to her many appearances, both on screen and on stage. She once was married to a Frenchman. Her children were born in France. She's often said that she considers herself sometimes more French than British. She lived in France, I think in Paris, for around 20 years, and she now is back in the United Kingdom. She's married again in September of last year, and she currently appears as the fantastic Diana Taverner in the brilliant spy series Slow Horses. If you've not watched that, please go and do so. It is superb television, and as ever, Scott Thomas delivers in her role as the glacial and composed Deputy Spy Master, Diana Taverner. Given her connections to Paris and the fact that she lived there for such a long time, it came perhaps as no surprise that she would be attending Paris Fashion Week. And whilst there, an interaction, or perhaps better described as a lack of interaction, occurred between her and this one's wife. It's quite entertaining, in effect, to see the two of them come together. You have one lady who is an excellent actress and another who is a mediocre one. You have one individual who is known for always coming across in a classy manner, that she is composed and decent. I read an interesting interview with her in the Telegraph, I think it was just recently, where she was talking about her life, and she comes across as very down to earth and eminently likeable, a complete contrast to the pretentious, dislikable nature of this one's wife. But there's a piece of footage which has been slowed to allow you to understand the maximum extent of this behaviour, which demonstrates that Dame Scott Thomas probably is a decent judge of character when it comes to this one's wife, but also it provides me with an opportunity to break down what's occurring, driven by the narcissism of this one's wife, and you'll find it interesting, but also entertaining. Have a look at this. It is a short piece of footage, but a telling piece of footage, both in terms of the view of Kristin Scott Thomas and also the response of this one's wife. We see at the start of the clip that Kristin Scott Thomas is talking to another lady. I'm not sure who that is. It's not particularly important. She's looking towards that individual. This one's wife is the spare wheel in the conversation. She's there dressed as Snowy One Griftobi, hand raised as she turns. Kristin Scott Thomas is continuing to look towards the other woman. This one's wife focuses on Kristin Scott Thomas, who is still not looking at her, still not engaging with her. Scott Thomas is saying something to the other woman and is responding whilst possibly looking into the distance also. This one's wife starts chuntering. She's not being engaged with by the other woman or Kristin Scott Thomas. She places her hand across her chest as if she's about to engage in some kind of weird Jedi ritual, and she starts talking. But Kristin Scott Thomas doesn't turn to her as she speaks. She ignores her, simply signaling, "I'm not interested in listening to you." This naturally wounds this one's wife. The failure to provide any kind of response to the narcissist starves the narcissist of fuel in that moment, and also threatens the narcissist's need for control. It's a double whammy, which is hugely problematic for the narcissist. As a consequence of this one's wife's narcissism must scramble to gain control. One way would be to do so directly. So she could say, "Oi, Scott Thomas, listen to me." Or grab her arm and yank on it. But facade management is at play, so it prevents her from taking those rather direct acts. An alternative would be for her to assert control indirectly, which would mean her criticising Scott Thomas to somebody else. That option wouldn't be available as a consequence of the immediacy and the likelihood that other individual wouldn't be receptive to it. Therefore, what her narcissism must do is cause her to essentially jettison Scott Thomas in that instance by deciding, well, I don't want to talk to her. And therefore, that's why this one's wife, who was talking to herself because Kristin Scott Thomas wasn't listening, then turns and engages the other woman. At this point, Scott Thomas does turn and look, and the look on her face is as if to say, yeah, not going to bother with that weirdo. You'll also notice that this one's wife engages in her usual grabbing at somebody through the direct assertion of control over the other woman. And she has that ridiculous facial expression of hers, which shows that it's entirely performative. And as she does so, she needs to look back at Kristin Scott Thomas in an attempt to regain control over her. But she's wounded again, because although there was the briefest of glances from Scott Thomas towards this one's wife, she has decided, no, I'm not bothering with her, and looks away. This results in this one's wife then having to go for her Julia Roberts hand to face, oh gosh, look at me. Kristin Scott Thomas basically says, fuck you, I'm off. And you can see, as this one's wife puts her hand to her face, she glances across, only to see she's looking at an empty space, because Kristin Scott Thomas decides, I'm out of here. She demonstrates that she has no time for this one's wife. So what you witness is this one's wife attempting to assert control directly over Kristin Scott Thomas and fails, leaving her talking to herself. She then turns to the other woman, having essentially going into a position of withdrawal from Kristin Scott Thomas to get the control that she failed to achieve directly. But then she can't help but glance back to see if she's getting anything from Kristin Scott Thomas, who then decides that she's away. Doesn't engage with this one's wife in the slightest, recognising that Snowy Griff isn't worth talking to, and thus this one's wife is wounded not once, but twice, as a consequence of this failure, whereby she is not only ignored by Kristin Scott Thomas, but she demonstrates that she's a performative ass, talking to herself, engaging in her over-exaggerated facial expressions, and putting her hand to her face. She looks like the doofus that she is, and you understand precisely what's going on here by virtue of her narcissism and the narcissistic dynamic. By knowing that she is a narcissist, by knowing she is the narcissist in that exchange, it then enables you to understand what's taking place. And so you see a narcissist being wounded twice, asserting control by withdrawing, turning to another person to assert control over them, being wounded again, and then left staring into thin air as Kristin Scott Thomas maintains why she's a class act of recognising, I don't want anything to do with you, Snowy Griff. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for watching.